Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I have a tournament report for Aldershot Regional Championships that went on over the past weekend over here in the UK, where I actually came first place with Landorus Crobat, which is insane. It's the first tournament I've ever won. I've top cutted a few, but it's the first one I've ever won, so it was a pretty great experience. The event was run super well. The guys at Aldershot always run their events really well, and there were a few hiccups with pairings and things, but they dealt with everything so well. It was so smooth, and it was a really good day. So onto the event. In general, there was over 70 masters, meaning that there were points offered for top 16, which meant quite a few big name UK players managed to get enough points to get their Worlds invite in this tournament. I'm going to go over those a little bit later, just congratulating them all. That also meant there were 7 rounds of Swiss, and the Swiss rounds were 50-minute best of 3 series. So Swiss in general was pretty long. Swiss started about 11:30 in the morning and didn't finish till 7 o'clock at night. So Swiss itself felt like a long day. As for the field, there were huge amounts of Executor. Seismitoad has been doing really well recently, so me and Joe expected there to be quite a few Executor decks, but definitely not, like I've put there, I would easily say that the field was 30% Executor, if not more. Me and Joe expected Executor, but not in the number that people played it in. It was really quite surprising. There were very little showings from Landbats and Seismitoad. There was one or two Seismitoad decks that, due to all of the Executor, were further down the field, and then I think there were three or four Landbats overall in a 70+ field of Masters, which is pretty insane. There was a couple of Flareon and Yveltal that also had reasonable showings, but not Yveltal did not have the showing that it usually has, as it's a pretty sort of standard deck, does well against most things really. So I was quite surprised that there wasn't more Yveltal than there actually was. And then there were some crazy decks that actually made it into Top Cut, including Wobbuffet Bats and Groudon EX. And yeah, it was pretty interesting to see some of these lesser known decks that sort of one or two people have the guts to try end up doing really well and getting into Top Cut. So this was the list I ran. I'm not going to go over the list in this video. I may do more of a deck analysis if you guys would like it, but I'm just going to leave the list there. We decided to cut down on the Zubat, Golbat and Crobat line, because when in mine and Joe's testing with Landorus Crobat, I felt personally that the deck was too clunky with the 4-4-3 Crobat line, and therefore I wanted to cut it down just to add some consistency to the deck, and rather than use Crobat to get big one-shot knockouts, I wanted to use Golbats and Crobats just to do that extra little bit of damage to then take the knockout on the following turn, rather than do it all at once. It meant I could run cards like Headringer and Enhanced Hammer that really sort of flipped some matchups in my favour, and it just, I feel, made the deck more consistent overall. Like I say, I'll do a deck analysis on this, and if you guys would like it, post it down in the comments if you guys would like to see more of an analysis on the deck. But the main sort of thing with the deck is the Crobat line was a lot smaller than a lot of the Crobat lines we've been seeing in Landorus Crobat decks as of late. Other things with the deck, I was overall happy with how it ran. I felt supported routed a few games, which was kind of worrying, but because Landorus only has a 1 energy attack, it's pretty easy to not really require much to be able to continue with your strategy and start taking prizes, which will hopefully which draws you more cards and gives you more outs into supporters overall. The second Lucario was underwhelming. I only ever used Lucario in about 2 of my games, and I never got the second one out. I always used it as discard fodder. So I'll probably, like I say, replace that with a supporter or maybe another bicycle or something like that, just to help draw through the deck a bit more. Headringer and Enhanced Hammer were insanely useful, especially against Groudon. You'll see a little bit later on that I played Groudon, and it was insanely good against Groudon. Enheadring itself is just a general annoyance to a lot of EX decks, so it was really useful. Hawlucha is still one of the best Pokemon to trade with EXs. I did not face Seismitoad at all on the day, but that was why I wanted to have the Hawluchas in there. But it turns out that Hawlucha doesn't just deal with Seismitoad well, it dealt with a Mewtwo really well. It dealt with a couple of other EXs really well, taking 2 prizes to them taking 1. And finally, Trump Card would have been quite handy in some situations. I was often, perhaps not often, but I was sometimes stuck with parts of the Crobat line or extra strong energy or things where I couldn't discard them with a Sycamore, because I felt I would be more beneficial to keep the strong energy or the part of the Crobat line, which made the deck a little bit more inconsistent. But if I had a Trump Card in the deck, I think I would have felt better about discarding cards, because I knew I would have the out to Trump Card to be able to get them back later on. And finally, before we get into the main tournament report, small congratulations to Luke Sabin, Sam Taylor, Adam Hawkins, Ollie Barnett, and everyone else that gained their invite to Worlds. Like I say, top 16 got points, so all of these guys managed to get their invite into Worlds this year, which was really, really good for them. And whilst I won't be going to Worlds, I wish all 4 of you and everyone else going to Worlds the best of luck. So on to the tournament report, and my round 1 was against Luke Sabin, someone I've played, a very, very good player from the UK, someone I've played a few times before. He is a very good player, and he turned over an Executor, and this was a matchup that I had tested, but I wasn't 100% confident with, just because if they can get the blockade set up quicker than you can start taking prizes, then the Executor player can often win just by you dead drawing. But game 1, he managed to get the setup a little bit too late, and by then I'd taken enough steam with Landorus and Crobat kills that I could just take out another couple of Executors to be able to take my last prizes. Game 2, he set up the Executor perfectly, turn 2 blockade, and I didn't have a supporter all game. And he just ran through the deck, because at that point you can't draw into anything really. And then finally, game 3, he actually started Jirachi and had to attach retreat into a Genesect and dead drew from there, which meant I managed to bench him out, unfortunately, which isn't always the best way to win. There were some pretty unlucky flips on his side. He missed all of his crushing hammers. There was about probably 7 or 8 crushing hammers that he flipped over the 3 games that he missed, unfortunately. But overall, I managed to outpace the Executor deck. Executor is a pretty good matchup for Landorus Crobat, just because you can get rid of their eggs. One notable thing is he didn't play Mr. Mime, which I don't really consider a mistake. I'm not sure many people expected a large amount of Landorus Crobat, and therefore a lot of the Executor players decided to take out their Mr. Mime in favour of another consistency card, just to help them run through the deck a bit quicker. So I don't blame him for not playing the Mr. Mime. I don't feel that was a bad decision on his part. I feel he just wasn't expecting a Landorus Crobat, or very many Landorus Crobat at all, which was true. There was only, like I say, 3 or 4 people playing Landorus Crobat, so overall it was the right play. It was just unfortunate that he got paired against the Landorus Crobat round 1. But like I say, Luke Sabin went ahead and got top 16 anyway, so he's a really good player in the UK. Round 2 was against someone I'd never met before, Slane Harris, who also turned over an Executor, and he did indeed have the Mime, which makes the game a little bit more difficult on the Landorus Crobat side of the field. Game 1, it was very similar to the series with Luke Sabin. Game 1, he managed to get the setup a little bit too late. He did get a turn 1 Mr. Mime, which really meant I had to focus where I put my Crobats, whether I wanted to get rid of the Mime or whether I wanted to stop him getting more Executors out. But I decided it would be for the best to stop him getting any more Executors out, and then just try and take 2 prizes on an Executor and an Execute on the bench at the same time with a Crobat and a Landorus, which meant that he couldn't respond next turn, and it gave me a turn of supporters. So game 1 I managed to beat him. Game 2, again, he managed to get the blockade set up really well. It was turn 2 or 3, and again I didn't get any supporters all game, meaning that I dead drew, which is what the deck does. And then game 3, again, he just he couldn't really get into anything. I took 3 prizes on eggs in, I think, as many turns, which meant he was really sort of behind on Steam, trying to get the Executors out, and I was just denying him the Executors, which is the main strategy on the Landorus Crobat side of the field. And it meant that, unfortunately, he lost Game 3, meaning that it was a 2-1 win to me. Game 3 was against I think he was a Dutch player. I can't say 100%, but I think he said he was Dutch. Jimmy Larson, who is one of the nicest people I've ever met. He was so hospitable. He was so friendly. And considering I don't think English was his first language, we had some good chats about the format and everything like that. He was a really good guy. He turned over a Groudon, and I was really, really worried. I hadn't not tested the Groudon matchup whatsoever. I didn't expect to see any Groudon at all. So I was a little bit dumbfounded as to what to do. There was only 2 games in this series, unfortunately. The first game, he did manage to get 2 Groudons set up, but because of how slow Primal Groudon is, I was able to deal enough damage to Groudons to be able to sort of put them weak enough to not have to spend too much energy knocking them out once they'd start swinging into my EXs. So eventually I was ahead of the prize trade, and this was a match where Hawlucha came in so strong for me. Hawlucha is doing sort of 80 damage at a time to a Primal Groudon, meaning I could sit and snipe either of the Groudons on the bench. I have Lysander, so I could Lysander one up if I had a knockout, anything like that. He did take it to 1 prize, and it was pretty scary, but I did manage to win Game 1. And Game 2, it was very similar. Unfortunately, I think it was I again met him in top 8 where the games went to time, but again the Primal Groudon. Well, the second game was very similar. I knew I had to take out the Groudons before they became Primal Groudons to be able to one-shot my EXs, because that's pretty much what Primal Groudon does. It builds up a Primal Groudon, one-shots an EX, and if they can't take out a Primal Groudon in one turn, they then scramble switch into another Primal Groudon and take another 6 prizes from there, which is not difficult for Primal Groudon in the future, but I feel it's a little bit too slow at the moment still, which meant he did run things like Scorched Earth, but obviously I benefited from them as well, because I'm playing Fighting Energy as well, so unfortunately that helped me a little bit as well. Robo Substitutes, as you can see there, were a pretty big problem for me. I had to play around them, because I'm pretty sure he played at least 3 and benched 2 of them sort of at once, so I had to play around them. But overall I won the 2-game series against a deck I had not tested against, and Primal Groudon is definitely a threat, especially perhaps less so now than when it gets Mega Turbo next set, but Primal Groudon I think next set is going to be very good, because when it can get set up it sort of steamrolls opponents, and when with Mega Turbo it's going to be able to do that so much easier. Round 4 was against Lucian Lanes, another player I'd never met before, and he was playing Night March, which I felt really confident with, because me and Joe have probably tested Crobat Landorus against Night March more than anything. Not really sure why, because the Crobat Landorus has an insanely good odds against the Night March deck, just because Joltix have 30 HP and Mews only have 120 HP. Game 1, I was able to do everything that Landorus Crobat wants to, and I was able to snipe off Joltix pretty quickly. He did get a pretty big Pumpkaboo going, which was slightly worrying, and he did indeed also have Mr. Mime, so I had to dedicate my Crobats into taking out Joltix instead of dealing damage to Mews or getting other knockouts. But that was okay. Game 2, I unfortunately had a I drew horribly, and he got a turn 1 180 with a Mew EX, which is basically what the deck aims for, meaning that he knocked out a Landorus in the first turn, a Lucario in the second turn, and from there it just sort of went downhill. So I scooped and wanted to get a longer game 3 in, just because I knew with a longer game 3 I would have more of an advantage, just because I could take my time, think about my damage placements, and be able to hopefully overpower the Night March. And indeed that happened. Game 3, he unfortunately miscalculated some damage and only did a 160 damage attack against the Landorus when he was aiming to get the one hit knockout. I nearly didn't notice it myself, but I wanted to check the discard just to see how many VS Seekers he'd used, and happened to count the Night Marches at the same time. And unfortunately that didn't knock him out, which meant I could take 4 prizes on Mew EXs with 1 Landorus, which put me ahead in the game so much that he couldn't really come back. But Night March, again, another deck that's definitely a threat at the moment and that you should definitely test against. I was actually considering Night March to play on the day as well, but I didn't feel confident enough with the eggs matchup and the format in general, what was going to be played, so that I didn't want to risk having a bad day against Seismitoad or anything like that. But yeah, it's definitely a deck you need to test against, and I think we're going to do, at some point on the channel in the next few days, we're going to do a Night March sort of updated deck list, because there's many different ways you can play the deck now, so make sure you look out for that. Round 5 was against Wei Shanqi, a player again I'd never played against, who was playing a very anti-meta sort of deck. It was Seismitoad, Manectric, and Virizion, and I'm pretty sure there was a Mewtwo in there, well, a Mewtwo or 2 in there as well. But Seismitoad, Manectric, and Virizion were the only 3 I could remember offhand. And unfortunately for him, this was a game that I wasn't happy about winning, but I won it, but I didn't feel it was the best representation of what his deck could do, because unfortunately, game 1 he started lone Mewtwo, I think, and didn't draw any basic Pokemon. Game 2 he managed to set up pretty quickly, and I scooped because I knew as soon as the Seismitoad lock was down, and he was threatening everything on my board. He had a Mewtwo built up to take out a Lucario if I wanted to go anywhere near the active position. He had a second Seismitoad set up to be able to do huge damage against Landorus. I decided to scoop just because I wanted a longer game 3 to again think about my decisions a bit more and take the ease off of the time limit a little bit. But unfortunately game 3 he again started lone Mewtwo, and I managed to donk him twice in the 3-game series, which is really unfortunate. I don't like the concept of donks, but unfortunately if that's the only way a deck's if that's the way a deck has to win, then that's the way a deck has to win. I don't really feel his deck got the correct potential to play show as well as what it was meant to do as well as it could, because of the fact I donked him. But even so, I did get to see a little bit later on in the day what the deck could do, and anti-meta style decks are definitely a real good call at the moment, just because he had all of his bases covered really. He had Manectrics for Yveltal, he had Virizion for Seismitoad, he had Seismitoad for Landorus, he had Mewtwo just as a big damage dealer. I think he had Garbodor as well, which is just in general is a bit of a pain. So anti-meta decks are definitely a good call at the moment, if your meta's a little bit shaky like the UK one is at the moment. The UK meta changes week on week, which is pretty insane. And then, due to having 5 wins, round 6 and round 7, I was able to intentionally draw into top cut with Luke Kirkham, a good friend of mine, playing Wobbuffet, Crobat, Mewtwo, and Sam Taylor, another good friend of mine that I've known for a couple of years, playing Executor, Swampert, which is a really cool way of playing the deck, I think. Just before I get into the top 8, the top 8 overall was: first seed was me with the Land Bats, second seed was Luke Kirkham with Wobbuffet Bats, third seed was Sam Taylor with Executor, fourth seed was Stefan Ivanov with Flareon, fifth seed was Ryan Morehouse with Executor, sixth seed was Ollie Barnett with Donphan, seventh seed was Tamal Cameron with Seismitoad, Manectric, Garbodor, and eighth seed was Jimmy Larson with Groudon. So it was a pretty pretty crazy top 8. There was the only decks that were repeats of themselves were Executor, and everything else was sort of in its own field, which meant I was never 100% sure what I was going to be playing against until the order of the seeds was announced, and I knew that I'd be playing Groudon again, which was, I don't know, it definitely wasn't the best thing I could have played against, but it definitely wasn't the worst. But I sat down with Jimmy again, and we had some good conversations about the format and Primal Groudon in general and how it gets better next set. And in general, I felt like it was a good friendly game. There wasn't too much pressure on either of us. We were both happy to go out at that point or win at that point. I think we were both just happy to be in top 8. So it meant that it was a good sort of best of 3 series. The best 3 series for top 8, by the way, was 60-minute best of 3, so they were a little bit longer than Swiss. So game 1, I do similar to how I do in the first series between us. I damage the Groudons. I spread the damage out so that I know if he decides to scramble switch into a Groudon, either Groudon that he scramble switches into, he's going to be damaged, so I'm going to have the potential to knock him out next turn. And again, I take 6 prizes just because I can set up a little bit quicker than him. Game 2, he actually sets up a Primal Groudon in the equivalent of what's about 3 turns with Landorus' Shout of Power and things like that. He sets up a Primal Groudon in the equivalent of about 3 turns. He then sets up another one on the bench to scramble switch into, and he steamrolls me. He takes 6 prizes without me taking any. Just sitting there sort of scratching the Primal Groudon, not doing huge damage to it, just him sort of taking the hits, which is pretty much one of the best things Primal Groudon can do. It can just sit and take hits for a while, and then build up a Gaia Volcano on the bench to then just swing hard and fast. And then game 3, the first 2 games were really long, which meant time was called as we were setting up for game 3. So just before we'd turned our active Pokemon over, time was called. So it was the equivalent of a sudden death match, but with 6 prizes. So the first prize taken won, and unfortunately at that point my deck is superior to his, just because I have the ability to set up so much quicker with Landorus EX only needing 1 energy, and I also had the extra damage with Crobats, meaning that I was able to take 2 prizes. Well, not 2 prizes. I was able to damage a Hawlucha to the point where it was able to be hammer-headed next turn if he sent it to the bench. So it meant that I had the game either way, and there was unfortunately nothing he could do to get rid of the Hawlucha or take a prize, which meant I went ahead into top 4. Like I said, Jimmy is definitely one of the better players out there at the moment. He knows how to play Groudon really well, and like I said, despite him not having English as his first language, me and him had some really good chats, especially with Joe afterwards, about sort of the state of Primal Groudon and how much it gets better with Roaring Skies being released next month. So yeah, definitely, if you know him but haven't approached him before, make sure you go and speak to him. He's a lovely guy, one of the nicest guys I've played. So yeah, he's a good man. Top 4 was against Ryan Morehouse, a player I know to be incredibly good at the game. I've never actually played him before, which was... It was nice finally meeting him. I know Joe's played him 3 or 4 times, perhaps 2 or 3 times, and has said how good of a player he is and how friendly and nice he is. So it was nice finally getting to play a game with him. He was also running Swampert and Executor, which I'm not 100% sure where the Swampert sort of hype came from, but it was definitely the best Archieable card, I guess is the way you would put it, for Executor, just because you had Acrobikes to Diving Search into exactly what you want. So, unfortunately, Landorus has a much better Executor matchup, and after playing Executor, testing Executor quite a bit, and then playing Executor twice in Swiss, I really felt I knew what I was doing against the deck now. I knew to... there were still improvements I could make, but I knew to take out put as much pressure on an active executor and try to deny him new executors to be able to come out. That's the best strategy to be able to beat executor with the deck. And whilst he did play a mime, I could still keep pace with the Crobat drops to be able to get rid of the executes as they came out. And unfortunately, I can't remember exactly. I think he won game 1 and then lost game 2 and 3. But I'm pretty sure he definitely won one game. Which further proved that if Executor can get set up, it can definitely do well against pretty much any deck in the format at the moment, just because supporter cards are so essential. But yeah, great player. Ryan Morehouse is pretty well known in the UK, and I think he's quite well known across the pond as well. I really felt he knew what he was doing with the deck as well. A lot of the Executor players today, I felt like they knew I felt like they knew what they were doing, and they knew exactly how to play the deck, and it was just unfortunate that Landorus Crobat has a little bit of a stronger matchup against eggs than most other decks do. So yeah, Ryan Morehouse unfortunately wasn't quite able to set up the Executor game 3, which meant that I managed to take 6 prizes relatively quickly on executes, and I finished it off with a Jirachi, I think, which took me into the final against Sam Taylor, who, as you can see, was playing the exact same. I'm not sure how similar the lists were. I don't know whether they made the list together or what, but they definitely both played Swampert. And while we were playing, Ryan and Sam both told me that Swampert had been so useful to them, and that Archieing was not as difficult as most people think. It happened. They said they could get Swamperts out in sort of 70% of their games that they aim to. Some games it's not worth it, I think, but in the games that they aim to, they could always get. They said about 70% of the time, it was always easily achievable to get a Swampert out using Archie's Ace in the Hole. Sorry. So it's definitely useful to know that Archie's and Maxie's are, well, maybe the case isn't the same for Maxie's, but Archie's is definitely viable in some of these decks out there at the moment. But like I say, top 2 is against Sam Taylor, a player that I've known for probably 2 or 3 years now. He's an incredibly good player. He had a huge seniors run. I'm pretty sure he may have won seniors nationals a few years ago. So definitely a high caliber player. Also playing Executor. But by top 2, like I say, I felt with every game I played against Executor, I knew what I was doing a little bit better. And by now, I knew to hold energy just so they had less crushing hammer targets. I knew to take out the eggs to prevent them getting more executors out. And then I was beginning to understand plays a little bit more, like escape roping when he only had 2 eggs on the bench, rather than searching for something else with Karina, just to take out 2 eggs as quickly as possible. All of these things helped me sort of take as many prizes before he got the lockup on me, meaning that there was less pressure once he'd begun to lock me with blockade in drawing things, because I'd kept a lot of the cards I knew I needed, and I had taken as many prizes as possible before he got the lockup, meaning there was less pressure overall. Less pressure on me to need things from supporters. I could just sort of dump supporters early on, knowing that I wouldn't be able to play them, and search for the cards like Bicycle and Professor's Letter, that would help me get the stuff that he was going to be trying to prevent me drawing into. He was very, very good about the 2-game series. Unfortunately, it was only a 2-game series. The first game, well, both games, he couldn't really get set up as well as the deck intends to. He did get a Swampert, I think, in the second game, which obviously helped him, but by then I was a little bit too far ahead in prizes. It was pointed out to me that I actually missed taking the second game from him about, I think, 1 or 2 turns early. I damaged a Jirachi on the bench and then sort of forgotten about it. And I had a Crobat, and I had a Landorus set up and a Crobat in hand. So I was told that I could have gone the Jirachi route instead, but at the time I obviously didn't see it and was just focused on getting rid of the Executor, meaning that I didn't see the duo actually play on the bench. But yeah, that meant that I had taken pretty much so many Executor on, and I had one out overall. So shout out to pretty much everyone that I played against. They're all really good. They're all really good players, and they're all really nice people as well. And definitely a huge shout out to both Martin Cornwall for the event and Sam Taylor, just because we both felt pretty chilled out in the final. Sam had earned his invite by then, and I was just happy to be in the final, to be honest. So it meant that we had a pretty chilled out game 1 and 2, and I know Sam definitely wasn't sort of upset too much with losing, I don't think, because I think he was more happy for me because it was my first win, and he knew he was going to Worlds by then. So it meant we had a very chilled out top 2. So thank you very much, Sam Taylor. I was pretty sort of all over the place after the event. As you can see there, that was the trophy I won, and I also won a box of Primal Clash. So I will probably be uploading a 36 pack opening of Primal Clash to the channel at some point over the weekend. And like I say, if you guys want to know a bit more about the deck, if you guys perhaps want to play it at an upcoming tournament, there are not many until it's the big nationals tournaments, or national season soon. So definitely keep your eyes on the channel for some nationals coverage. I know me and Joe have a lot of ideas when it comes to nationals coverage and how we're going to deal with nationals overall. We have a lot of sort of ideas floating around about how we can get as good of videos to you guys as possible. So yeah, definitely make sure you keep your eye on the channel and sort of look out for the national videos. But bar that, thank you very much for watching. I have been Jack from Omnipoke, and I will see you all in another video.